Hello, Gabrielle again here from the Menopause Running Club. So I want to talk to you today about my training method, which is called the Running Reset. And this is really a process that is designed to help you as a midlife woman, and it's based upon understanding how your body is changing and why, and how to adapt your training to actually then help you and support you as your body's changed. And this is a key thing now, because really, and this is how I came to this, because even though I was a personal trainer, even though I was doing strength training, even though I was strong, I'm dead flexible, I'm dead bendy, there was problems I really didn't have, but I was still getting injured. And you know, we have to acknowledge and realize that our bodies work in a very, very different way now. And if we carry on training in the same way or not doing the right things, sadly, and I wish this wasn't the case, but there will be more chance of us getting injured in the future. So I just want to tell you a little bit about how your body's changing first of all, and why that's the case. And you know, even for things like, I looked at the statistics and I can't remember what they were, but you know, the statistics for people finishing things like couch to 5K when they're older and getting injured are actually really quite high. And it's just such a shame that there's not a lot of information out here about what's changing and what you can do about it. And quite often, and this was certainly the case with me, I was feeling fantastic, and then suddenly I was hit with tendon issues that just affected me for months. And I know that's a really common story. So it's almost like we don't know these things are happening, or there's these changes going on in our body until we get hit with it, and then it can be just completely game over in terms of our running goals. And this is a story that's so familiar to me that I hear over and over again. So top line, what's changing in your body? You know about muscles mass reducing over time. I think we hit our peak muscle maybe even into our as early as our mid to late 30s, and then we start a decline. And that decline is happening for two things. Our power in our muscles is declining, and also our strength, and then the volume of our muscles is declining. So our muscles are basically shrinking, we're getting less strong, and we're getting less powerful. Now, people know the strength story and how important that is. People don't know so much about the power story, and that's key, because this is really important from a running point of view. It's really important from a balance point of view. Power is about speed, and it's about reaction times. It's strength and speed together. I was out running the other day, and this girl in her 30s ran past me looking so strong, so upright, so powerful, bouncy, you know, that sort of real effortless bouncy run. She looked solid and amazing. And funnily enough, like 2 minutes later, a woman who was probably my age came almost collapsed in, shuffling along and running, looking just so physically different. And I do encourage you to look at people running, because it's really helpful to see how we change. You know, she was leaning in, she was collapsed or crumpled around her core. She wasn't sort of bouncy, she was just sort of almost like plodding away, grinding away. And we want to avoid that. We don't want to be running like that. We want to retain that strength, that power, that posture. That's what we need to be aspiring to. But it's not anything that we're doing wrong, it's just how our bodies are changing that's leading us to just sort of have this decline. But the weird thing is we can carry on running for a long time while things are getting worse. And this is what catches us out, because we don't really notice those changes. They're so subtle over time. So we're losing strength, we're losing power, our balance is being affected. And something else called our proprioception is affected, and that's our sense of where we are in space and our ability to control our muscles and control the movement of our muscles, and that's key. And because running is about, if we think about running, we're responding to the environment that we're in. You know, the ground is uneven, we're having to change direction, uphill, downhill. And our body should be running like a machine and responding to that to keep us in good posture and good form as the terrain and the environment around us changes. And that requires our body to have this very finely tuned process of knowing where everything is and being able to make these little minuscule corrections in real time to keep us running in a good way, that's starting to go. So the mechanics of our body are breaking down, which is putting more stress through our bodies in a bad way. You know, if you think about when you went to school, and I always remember coming back to school in September when I hadn't picked up a pen for 6 weeks, and you'd be sort of trying to write on your new books and your fingers just weren't seeming to work. And that was just really because we hadn't rehearsed those little muscles and those fine-tuned motor skills for 6 weeks. And we'd started, even at that young age, for those motor skills to get worse. Of course, once you've been sat there writing for hours and hours a day, then you're able to control that pen and write well, most of us. And it's the same thing with our bodies, and that's what's sort of started to change. And another thing that's happening is what we call muscle imbalances. Now, this is key because this isn't really to do with age, but it's more to do with time. I'm sat down in front of you, and if you're probably like me in that you've probably spent decades now sat in front of a desk, one way or another, for hours and hours and hours, and that has an impact on how our bodies move and work. So for example, these muscles can start to get shorter because you're always like this and then pulled in, and that creates this sort of rounded shoulder position. That doesn't suddenly change when you start to go into that position, and you then go and run like that, and that has an impact on your mechanics when you run. The muscles in the front of our hip flexors can get short. Our glutes, as we probably know, can get lazy from being sat on all day and stretched out. And that means when we go running, our glutes don't fire up properly. And these are things to do with muscle imbalances. And because we then go and do these things very repeatedly, we sit at a desk, then we go and run, and running is a very repetitive thing or activity. Well, then what starts to happen is these muscle imbalances start to get more pronounced, and we create our bodies almost rewire themselves to create these incorrect movement patterns. And incorrect movement patterns or imbalances essentially mean that one muscle's overactive and working too hard, and another muscle is underactive and not working enough and not strong enough. Now, our muscles have this use it or lose it policy, and anything that doesn't get used starts to get weaker. So in the example of your glutes, you know, you can end up being a lot more quad dominant on your running and barely ever using your glutes. And this is so common, but that over time will start to put too much strain on other parts of your body that are doing the work that your glutes should be doing. And this is where we can get tendonitis, you know, in our glutes, in our hamstrings, hip bursitis, hip niggles, lower back pain, because the wrong things are doing the work. We're running, but not all of our muscles are working. Some are being a bit lazy and others are overworking, and they can start to get injured as well because they're being stressed too much. And tendons are really exposed here because these incorrect running positions and these muscle imbalances that we're creating then end up, when we carry on running, unaware of how our bodies are changing, they start to take a lot more of the load. And the estrogen changes mean that our tendons and our ligaments are less elastic, stiffer, and they don't repair as quickly. They don't repair quickly anyway, but that they then start to become a problem. And tendon issues are really common. And we've all pulled muscles in the past. You know, you pull a muscle and it's painful immediately. You know, if you can't do anything, you definitely know you can't run. You can probably barely do anything, and you have to literally rest up for a few days. But within a few days or so, you're back doing what you did before. Tendons not so. You know, it starts with a little niggle that you can just ignore, and you do. Guilty. But then it doesn't go away until it does stop you running, and then you're in quite a long, protracted, rehab period to build up the muscles around the tendons and, give the tendons a rest and gradually come back to running. But people don't always have that structure to know what they can actually do to mean that they're not going to get those injuries again, and are able to do the right things at the right time and gradually build up this return to running. So this is what's changing in our bodies. So we have to change. Just to go and run more is not the answer. It's just making that problem worse. We have to start to look then at how we get well, there's a few different things that we're trying to do. We have to get stronger. And a lot of people know, well, I'm going to the gym and get stronger. Yeah, that can work to a degree. But I've had people in my gym, where I am now, who are runners, who are crossfitters as well, who do strength training, and they will sit there and do a glute lift, and I will put 50, 60 kilos on there, and they'll still tell me, I can't feel my glutes working and my back's hurting. So they can lift the weight off the floor and it looks right, but the glutes aren't doing the work. And that's because they haven't got they've not been able to get the activation into their glutes. This can happen with the core, it can happen with lots and lots of different muscles where we actually lose the ability to contract those muscles. We have lost that connection, and this is what really happens between our mind and that muscle to make it fire and work. So there's no point in just going to the gym if our muscles aren't active. So we have to go through a phase where we start to reactivate our muscles. And that's not about heavy work, but that's about easy work. So that might be in the example of glutes, where you're doing glute bridges, but you are taking your time and you are lying there and you are really concentrating on squeezing your glutes left and right. That's what I'm trying to show you with those fists, and really feel those working. And something that people tip here for you is, if you're doing that and you go and do that after, check your left and your right, because sometimes, and very commonly, and this is true for me, my left glute, I had to think about which one, will fire up quite easily, my right not so much. So naturally one side is stronger than others. I'm left-handed and left-footed, so that's why. So we have to get this activation right. Another area that people really struggle with is in the feet. So plantar fasciitis is common, tendonitis, Achilles tendonitis, and also people feeling stiffness in the feet and pain in the feet, and also starting to notice the feeling a little bit more ploddy. And we can start to lose that sensitivity, and there's lots of little muscles in our feet that start to become forgotten and weakened, and not using our feet properly when we run it can then have problems higher up in our bodies that can impact us. So we have to start, it's not just activating our glutes, we might be needing to activate the smaller muscles in our feet and start building up the strength through our big toe again. I never knew I'd have to do big toe exercises, but I do. or other common areas are not being able to engage the core and know when we're in a neutral position. So we have to start this re-education process of our body to activate all the muscles that are probably not working or not working in the right way. So that's the first way I train people, is building upon this, understanding them, and really making sure that we're activating these really crucial muscles. When we've got those muscles activated, yes, we can build up strength. Yeah, because that's fine. We can do that now because we can feel them working. So you can start gradually doing your strength training exercises and building up the weight over time, and you will get strong. But if we're going to do strength, and this is key, you don't want to just do a generic strength training program. You need to do a strength training program that is designed for runners, that is designed to help you move how you run and the muscles that you need for running to be strong. Okay, and when we understand what that is, so we don't just need to have, let's say, strong legs, we need to have strong muscles in our hips, because that's where we do drive the control from. We need to have good muscles in our back so that our posture's good. We need to have good muscles in our core so we can keep everything in the right place, and through our feet and our ankles. So we build a program that's designed for runners. None of us have got time to waste doing things that aren't going to make a difference. So I'd love to have nice big biceps and very well defined triceps, but I haven't got time to sit there doing that all day long, which would get me to that. What's more important for me is that I run well and I run strong. So I spend my time, or the bulk of my time, doing strength training that's going to make a difference when I run. Now, something else that happens is, yes, we've activated those muscles, so you're in the gym, you're lying on the floor and you can feel your glutes working finally, and you're doing your exercises to get them stronger. That is not a guarantee that when you go out running, they will work. And again, this is what I have learned from my own body, and I see this time and time again with clients. So if you think about being in the gym, you might be doing some lunges and some glute bridges. That's going to take you 5 minutes. So great, I can make my glutes work hard for 5 minutes. What happens when you go outside? you're going to run for half an hour, longer. Our glutes have got to be firing for all of that time. So we have to then start to create that connection or bridge that gap between what's happening in the gym and what's happening in our runs, to make sure that the work we're doing in the gym is actually translating into our runs and we're using those muscles all the way through. If we miss out this step, then we're still going to be running our way into injuries. Okay, so that is absolutely key. And this comes from being aware of your running technique, learning how to check into your body, learning how to be aware of what good form is. We have to feel our way into this. Yeah, that's really important. So another part of the way we would train is also building this sense of movement control. There's no point, I'm going to say it because you might hate me anyway, but there's no point going out for a run with your earphones in, playing your music and running with no idea what's going on in your body. You'll get back to that when we've done the rewiring. But in the short term, you need to be running with awareness and feeling when things are right and when they're not right. And that information that you take back, that I take back with my clients into our programs. So I had a client the other day who's been doing all of this stuff, and she was running and her hip started to hurt. And that was to do with the fact that as she was getting tired and collapsing a little bit through her core, that her glutes were switching off, so the pounding starts to come back through the hips. So these are the things that we have to build that awareness of, so we know how to maintain our running form, how we know how to keep these muscles working whilst we're doing our running. That's key. So this is something that we need to work on. And then we train power. So power is a completely different thing to strength training. If strength training is doing heavy lunges, power is doing jumping lunges and building this explosive power back into our legs, back into our muscles. If we want to be able to run like that younger woman that I explained, looking upright and strong and light on her feet because she's bouncy, because there's power going through her muscles, then we have to train power back into our runs. So we do that with various exercises, agility exercises, power in our feet, power in our legs, power in our glutes, power in our core. We need to build that power by doing a different type of exercise, which is explosive. We have to be careful with that. So we build that in slowly. We can't do that if you've got Achilles issues that haven't been resolved. We have to wait until they're resolved before we build that power in. And we only build power in very small amounts. But we can, again, with the strength, we can start with light weights and then progress it. The same with power. We can start with easier power training and then progress it to heavier power training. And then again, we take that into our runs and we feel that power, that explosive fat power when we're doing shorter runs like hill sprints and speed work, speed sessions. Okay, so hopefully that just gives you an idea of what that training method looks like, and that we're structuring our workouts and our weekly routines around that and building all these elements in at the right time. You know, quite often people can feel like they're right, I'm doing a yoga class, I'm doing my strength training, I'm doing my marathon training plan, but they're all random things that are being ticked off. You're not tied into a nice structure where you're working through across all of those things and training, bringing each of those elements into your training across the course of a week. And it might sound like there's a lot of things there, but actually you're doing the right things in the right way, in the right order, and you get it right, it's actually really an efficient way of training. And it might be that you're doing, so, you know, some of this is building strength through your strength training or little daily habits. You might be building habits around your back, training your balance. At different times of day, I do balancing exercises when I come downstairs and I'm waiting for the kettle to boil. We have specific, you can do activation warm-ups that mean that you activate some muscles, the key muscles that are important for you before you go for a run. And then when you run, you're running with awareness, okay? And then of course, we're doing our stretching after, and we're making sure that we're working on our mobility and flexibility, and we can do that in little bits throughout the day or on recovery days. So we can start to build all these elements into our programs, into our plans, so that we're ticking off all of the things, or we're doing all of the things that address the changes that we're experiencing in our body. Okay. And something that people ask me sometimes, well, what happens if I'm injured? What happens if I've got Achilles tendonitis and I can't run right now, or I'm very limited in my running? Well, this still works for you, because you are building strength in your feet, strength in your knees, strength in your hips, strength in your glutes, strength in your legs, strength in your core, strength in your posture. We can build the strength in all of those areas while you're rehabbing an injured area. So then by the time you gradually go back to running, and when we take you back to running, the process is that you're running with awareness. So you're running better, you're using those muscles that you've built up when you've been training, and then we gradually increase how much you can run, making sure that we're not flaring up those issues again, and you gradually will be able to increase the amount of time that you can run until you're back up to the distances that you were before the injury hit you. But now you know that you've built a stronger body and you can run with more confidence, and you're feeling a lot of changes. So that's how that training method works. And it's really exciting. It really is getting some fantastic results for women. So I do encourage you to look into all of those things and start to try out some of them for yourself, and to run with awareness. The people that I'm working with are finding that they're more motivated, because they know that the structure is set up to get them to their primary goal, which is a running related goal. And knowing everything is working takes that guesswork out of, I'm doing all this but it's not working. That can feel really demotivating. And you see and feel the changes really quickly. You'll notice your posture change and you feel more upright. You'll notice that extra strength very quickly. I'm talking about 2 or 3 weeks can be the time it takes you to feel. You'll notice your speed getting up. You'll notice you recovering better, because you're building a more resilient body. You're not, and that strength is all round. We're trying to make sure that all of the muscles that you need for running are working in the way they're supposed to. That starts taking the strain off the areas where you've been feeling it. And that's how you then start to feel more like yourself again. So that's how that training method works. So I hope you found that really interesting. I hope that's given you some ideas, or good understanding of how your own body is changing, and some good ideas about what you can do, how you can start to think about and approach your own training plan, and let that be a point for your research from here. And if you do want to chat to me about working with me and me doing that training program for you, well, you know where I am, and you can always come and have a conversation with me about that. So thanks for your time today. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now.